So what Aligned Energy is focused on is really helping large companies now that have these massive infrastructures of IT that they've built over a long period of time, right? From back in the early 90s, their first data centers, to where they are now, where they have this infrastructure that's a 30-year asset, right? They have to build large infrastructure, large deployment of energy, large deployment of materials. And what's essentially happening is a rapid change of IT, the rapid growth is creating a disconnection between that, a misalignment. So what happens now is not only is it unsustainable from a P&L perspective, data center costs too high, energy use too high, it's that they're too high per megawatt, but when people start to factor in the utilization of infrastructure, the costs are 3x. So the compressibility in the infrastructure, the misuse of energy and infrastructure for large organizations has reached such that there's almost desperation of, let me just go outsource or let me move to a cloud provider. Whereas if you were to actually rationalize and fix your own internal issues in data center deployment and compress, defrag, if you will, your existing data infrastructure, you can get 3x, 4x improvement in your P&L cost of data center infrastructure. We've seen this again and again working with large clients. And there's kind of a perfect coupling between that rationalization of costs for these large corporations and sustainability. Because what happens if you correctly align your business mission, your IT mission, what happens is you're delivering and using less resources, less steel, less copper, less materials. And really the waste out there in data centers is, we're chopping down trees to make a pencil. And what we're seeing is the data center industry is really going through that same supply chain collapse that other industries have done, right? There's been large retailers kind of showed the world, right? How to optimize retail supply chains, the auto industry, if you looked at, kind of those disruptive change. And the same thing, quite frankly, is going to happen to corporations that don't rationalize their IT infrastructure, because you can't have 25, 30% of your overhead being IT infrastructure and be 45x more expensive than your competitor. You just can't stay competitive. So what we're seeing, the more we work with large corporations, is the P&L impact, the positive P&L impact that they can achieve by doing this is massive. I mean, we're talking, 1/4 of where they are now. If they can get that balance right of rapid delivery as they need it, better utilization, and then taking their existing infrastructure and rationalize it. The large financial institutions and the large network carriers. So both of these large insurance companies. So where, and this is just an example. So a company that needs highly reliable IT infrastructure where it's a transactional issue. So what we focus on are highly reliable infrastructure that is, dramatically more efficient, not only just from an energy efficiency standpoint, but a capital efficiency standpoint. So when you start to work at scale, you can implement things and really improve your cost basis. So one of the things that we're highly focused on is you take a large organization that has 30, 50 megawatts of IT infrastructure. They typically will have 100 megawatts, if they're 50 of IT, of generators, paralleling gear, power switch gear of infrastructure. And essentially that investment was made only for the hottest day of the year if they were under full load. And so what we're doing with these corporations is allowing them, by coming in with technologies where our peak PUE is 1/10 that of traditional systems, where we're actually able to mine that existing investment. And so what happens now is they can create new capacity in where they already have their people, where they already have the network, where they already have their resources, that not only from just a CapEx, it's 1/3 the cost of going out and outsourcing new capacity, But what also happens is if you take into the account of your people, your network, your security, all of your controls, the costs really start to become significant to where they're 1/5, 1/6 the cost of outsourcing. And that's what we're seeing is this trend in the marketplace with corporations that are trying to just manage for that short-term cash, are actually doing things that if they were to approach the problem differently, they could actually yield a much lower yearly cash outlay for IT infrastructure, but then not setting themselves up for this kind of move to an OpEx, solely to an OpEx model where they end up overpaying for it. So while we'll deliver things on an OpEx model, we're big believers in price transparency, so that whether you bought it or leased it, you're basically getting a good deal, as opposed to the industry right now is taking advantage of kind of the issue that corporations are in right now, where they've overbuilt infrastructure in many cases, or they have infrastructure that's not adaptable to their needs. Therefore, they're so inefficient. Therefore, I'll do this other thing, which looks better. Our philosophy is we can, do a third better than what the co-location and the wholesale models are, and we can do 1/6 better than where traditional P&L corporations are from a P&L impact. And this is not only important for the bottom line and making it more sustainable for an economic perspective, but there's a pure coupling into just lower material use. There's nothing more sustainable than somebody who already has a bunch of generator infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, than to fully utilize it, right? Doesn't make sense to have that sitting idle and keep replacing it with stuff that you don't use. It makes much more sense to take full advantage of the existing investment that you have. And then once you've created efficient infrastructure, and now your own internal infrastructure, your cost basis is competitive in the marketplace, when you go add new infrastructure to do it in an efficient way. Yeah. It's a great question. We focus, my firm belief is the data center model is one of the true models out there where there is no difference between a sustainable approach from an environmental and a cost perspective, because you're talking about deployment of materials and deployment of huge amounts of energy and water, which is where your cost is. 50 to 75% of the data center model is OpEx, and of that OpEx, 80% is the energy cost. So if you focus on lowering your costs, and truly lowering your costs, right, not just moving around and shifting cost structures, but truly getting it efficient, and then looking at secondary, capital deployment, or the way in which I deploy it as a secondary issue, but just first focus on the most efficient from a capital and OpEx perspective. What you find then is that is a totally sustainable approach. There's no difference between the two. And so the biggest thing that a sustainability officer can do is to work within the organization to create a common lens and a common way of looking at data center costs. And if you align, the server side, server utilization, great example of, there's a big issue with just a lot of deployment of server infrastructure that is underutilized. So virtualization is a big thing that corporations are trying to do to create more virtualized environment, to consolidate. Those are all things that compact the usage case or the usage of data center infrastructure. And they're all there. It is a sustainable thing to do. It's a good thing from a cost perspective. Where we're focused on is creating infrastructure that is virtualizable. In other words, we can deploy it much more rapidly, provision it, and we can also take existing infrastructure that you already have and lower the cost on the P&L per server. Right? You got to look at IT infrastructure on the cost per server or cost of the business mission per infrastructure.